Because like you said, lofty goals and, big op-eds in glossy magazines sound wonderful for these big think pieces or intellectual pieces. But is that going to help John, the guy who has the small business in XYZ city that doesn't have or will never have the sophistication of quote-unquote growth hacking or data-driven AI or any of this other nonsense, just to be able to be a better business person, be a better professional, be a better human? And I think that's what we set out to do. And I think the connector philosophy, similar to what we just talked about a moment ago with Dan, is this idea that you're not just in this moment of I'm going to a networking event, that mindset, but rather I am a good human trying to help other good humans to improve upon the general tone of humanity and business. And I may at some point receive profit in whatever profit means to me. It could be rewarding through friendship, rewarding through financial gain, but that is not my intent when I say John meet Sam and Sam meet John. It's the people that are the best, most amazing connectors and who do win in daily business life simultaneously, but again, with the right intent, the right motives, are people that are incredibly empathetic.
You don't have to do anything. Know yourself, build that sense of self-awareness, and you'll know what things you should be doing, because you'll know that those things will bring out the best you that you possibly can. I can't think of anything more important when you're a connector than just sitting back and listening to what people have to say, what they're passionate about, what they're trying to do, what their challenges are, and then using that connector mentality that you have to just figure out, how can I help them? What resources and what people do I know, or what people do I know who have resources that can support them? And that's how I do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Community Made Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Gaynor. Now, as you know, this season is all about how to grow, nurture, and amplify your business relationships. In the first few episodes of this season, I shared 3 unique stories which served as examples of how to reach the unreachable and befriend celebrities and billionaires. I shared my playbook on how to foster deep and genuine relationships with people at conferences and networking events. I also shared why you should go wide in your networking and deep in your nurturing, along with 6 ways to invest in your most important relationships, and much, much more. We're inching closer to the end of this season, and in today's episode, I sit down with 2 Superconnector friends of mine, Scott Gerber and Ryan Paugh. Now, Scott and Ryan co-founded YEC, the Young Entrepreneurs Council, in 2010, an invite-only organization for top entrepreneurs under the age of 40. Entrepreneur Magazine said that YEC has quickly become one of the most elite organizations of its kind, which is how I first heard of them. But since then, they've also started the Community Company, which is an organization that builds and manages professional communities for media companies and global brands, and the Forbes Council, which is a collective of invitation-only organizations for world-class executives. Both of these guys have been featured in every single publication you can imagine, including, wait for this, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Bloomberg, Fortune, Time, CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, Reuters, Mashable, BBC, NPR, Forbes, The Daily Beast, CBS News, U.S. News and World Report, Fox News, Inc., and Entrepreneur, and have been honored by NASDAQ and the White House. How do you like them apples? Now, I sat down with these 2 fine gentlemen in New York right before the release of their book called Superconnector: Stop Networking and Start Building Business Relationships That Matter. That book features a slew of, I guess I'd say, the industry thought leaders when it comes to networking and business relationships, including yours truly. And the one thing that I loved about this intimate conversation is that I was in the presence of both an extrovert and an introvert. Both of these guys were basically on opposite sides of the spectrum socially, and it was great to hear how they would navigate different social, situations really differently. I loved it. I mean, you hear me referring to Ryan as a unicorn on several occasions in the conversation. Also, this conversation gave me a little bit of a sneak peek of the inner workings of their very successful business partnership that's been going on 8 years now, which is, to me, inspiring. So a few housekeeping things to add before we get into this episode. First, we'll be giving away 10 copies of Scott and Ryan's book, Superconnector: Stop Networking and Start Building Business Relationships That Matter, in the Community Made group, a book that we referenced several times, obviously, in this episode. If you're not a member, joining the group is free. Simply visit communitymade.com to get access. Second, As you know, if you've listened to past episodes this season, we decided to take some of the concepts that we shared in this season on how to grow, nurture, and amplify your business relationships and teach them in an intimate live workshop setting. I love doing the podcast, but nothing beats being in an intimate environment, face-to-face, and having a group discussion. I'm super excited for the first one, which sold out before we actually announced the workshop on season 2 of the podcast. So because of that, we decided to announce a second date. So for dates and availability on that, visit superconnectorworkshop.com. That's superconnectorworkshop.com. And third, if you're a fan of what we're doing here at Community Made, I would be forever grateful if you shared this podcast with a friend. I specifically avoided the traditional marketing methods of building an audience for the podcast because I don't care for vanity metrics. I don't want a lot of listeners. I want the right listeners. And I'm a firm believer that amazing people like yourself know other amazing people. So if you know someone who would benefit from one of our episodes from this season or even our last one, please send it along to them. Without further ado, I won't keep you from it any longer. Enjoy this intimate conversation with the Superconnectors themselves, Scott Gerber and Ryan Paugh. Enjoy. Well, listen, it's great to sit down with both of you. And I'll bring up why specifically. Well, I mean, on many levels. Like, we've somewhat known of each other for a long time. We share a ton of mutual friends, so it's been a while in the making, and we just never had an opportunity. This is the first time we see each other face to face.
That's right.
So yeah, so I mean, I've been watching the growth of YEC and what you guys have built from afar. And again, a lot of mutual friends. This was meant to be on some level. And then Ryan, I know you played more of like a COO kind of behind the scenes,
man behind the curtain,
which is actually why I'm super excited because you guys both wrote this book, and you both have. You guys start the book on identifying like the type of profile you are, connector you are, which I think is so important because, I give feedback and advice on relationships based on like my personality, not knowing that other people are different. And I was at an event, was it 3 months ago in Vegas where I was speaking, and this guy came up to me and he's like, listen, I loved your talk, all this kind of stuff. He's like, but I'm super introvert. And he's like, it's so uncomfortable for me to be here and all that kind of stuff. And then he was saying about my like business partner is like super extrovert, and I'm like, well, you shouldn't be here. Like your partner should be here. Like it's like you need to understand like the DNA that you have and where you work within kind of your strengths and those kind of things. And just again, it's like one of those. I don't know where I heard it from, but like an entrepreneur giving advice is like telling you the numbers they use to win the lottery. You know what I mean? Yep. So to know like that's where you started the book, because there's so many books, and the book I'm talking about is Superconnector, which is coming out in February. There's just so many books that just the author speaks in absolutes, and this is how you should do things, and this will work for me, it'll work for you. So I love that you started the tone of the book in that direction. And it's funny because you guys thus far have been getting some, I mean, not only a lot of kind of mutual friends are in the book, but you're getting some great traction from a media perspective, and you guys have been getting great traction with the book thus far. I think it's definitely much needed in the space. I mean, the bulk of the advice and stuff like that in the marketplace is very kind of transactional. It's either very transactional, sticky like MLM marketing stuff or networking stuff, or it's so like high level, like the Village effect or something like that, like the importance of things that there's nothing tactical you can apply from it.
I think there's even one worse one that's in the market, and that's the one where it's the connector, and I'm using quotation marks as I say, it's the connector philosophy, but that's really masking transactional.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
No, I'm just going to follow these steps to make it look like I'm a much better guy or woman, and I'm not really in it for me, but yet I'm being really methodical about what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, who I'm saying it to, and I think that's what we found most intriguing of why we wanted to do this, because I don't think people intentionally are trying to be evil per se or trying to be Machiavellian in the way they think about the world. But I think that there's just this stigma I don't even want to go there, but this idea that networking is the way to do this. There's been empires built around it, from coaching to events to seminars to other books. And people are just so ingrained that even when they want to try to break out of that, they're sort of pulled back in because they don't know what those next steps are. So they want to take that mindset, but they don't actually take a step back to rethink the foundation. And that's what I think Ryan and I set out to do with this book. It's just the idea that this isn't like tomorrow you could just sort of tweak the things you've been doing. It's the things you've been doing are fundamentally wrong. Now it's how do we unlearn those fundamentally wrong things from some of the top people in the world, including mine and Ryan's experience in building these various communities for global brands through the community company, Forbes, YEC, and others, to really make it, as Ryan, I think, eloquently puts it, achievable and something that anybody can do. Because like you said, lofty goals and, big op-eds in glossy magazines sound wonderful for these big think pieces or intellectual pieces. But is that going to help John, the guy who has the small business in XYZ city that doesn't have or will never have the sophistication of quote unquote growth hacking or data driven AI or any of this other nonsense, just to be able to, be a better business person, be a better professional, be a better human? And I think that's what we set out to do.
What was the tipping point when you guys kind of realized, have you had the idea of doing a book like this for a long time? Or was there a specific moment you're like, something like this is needed?
I think in a way it fell in our laps. It came at the right time because we had 10 plus years of experience building community together. And it was just sort of a serendipitous occurrence. But what's great about it, I think, is the fact that you're getting, like you said, two crazy different viewpoints from an introvert and an extrovert. And, it's actually one of the things that was most difficult about putting this together is the fact that
even how we wrote the book, it's like, oh man, we should just talk about this book on the phone for 5 hours. And Ryan's like, oh my God, I have to get off the phone in 15 minutes because I need to write down my thoughts. It's just fundamental different viewpoints, but in the end,
But we're the bestest of friends. But until I think we sat down and did this book, we didn't realize how different we thought about community building, even though, we build this business together. But I think it's that blend of the two of us that makes the community company great. And I also think that it's what makes this book great because it's not a one-size-fits-all philosophy. I think anyone can be a great Superconnector, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite Superconnectors are introverts. And I think that the advice that's out there for them is not the right advice. Going back to what you said, it's sort of like templated out, and that's not the way to do it. This book is about reading about our experiences and the experiences of the Superconnectors like yourself. We showcased and taking what you like and applying it to your life and building your own philosophy from that.
It's amazing how many people that I know that are, by most people's standards, they think they're extroverts and all that kind of stuff, when really deep down they're introverts.
Yeah.
And then you see it like, was it Susan Cain's kind of quiet revolution, like all these people coming out of the woodwork. You're like, I didn't know you were an introvert. Or, there's ambiverts as well. You have kind of attributes of either, and that's sometimes why I try to steer away from labeling people a certain way. But you kind of touch on, I'd love to really touch on how you both connected initially, because you guys have both built an incredible organization in YEC, which, when did did you guys officially launch?
2010.
2010. So how did you guys kind of connect initially?
Yeah, so it's kind of one of those, literally the Superconnector story. We have a mutual friend named Dan Shaw-Bell, who, is sort of a workplace HR guru, millennial kind of guy, knows that that's his world. And when I had written my first book, Never Get a Real Job, I had reached out to him because I wanted to see, if I could take some of the philosophies I spoke about in the book and apply it to his audience. And he was like, oh yeah, this is great. This is wonderful. And then I started talking to him about this concept I had called YEC, which at the time was, a kernel of an idea. The basic premise was that I had basically in college built a company that did incredibly well for my age as junior in NYU. And then senior year, I had $700 left to my name due to every dumb decision one can make starting a business. I had no foundational understanding of business. I was a film student at NYU. Everybody thinks these days I went to Stern, fail there. And I basically took the last $700 left to my name and then built my next company, which was, successful, sustainable, and ultimately allowed me to have a lot more optionality in my life. And that's what I based the book on. So I said, Dan, I want to get a bunch of young entrepreneurs together that can help to take this mindset of youth entrepreneurship as a viable career path. Not necessarily the Richard Branson, go be a billionaire, millionaire, rich by 30, not that. But it's 2009, 2010 at this point. Recession, automation just starts hitting, its major upswing. youth unemployment is just a disaster, especially in the States and around the world, in different places, much higher even. And I want to get these people together, and I want to do these really meaningful talks and, have them answer questions of these young people that we can maybe syndicate to the media so that we get the word out about youth entrepreneurship. Well, that blew up. All these major media outlets started writing about this youth entrepreneurship movement as a viable career path. The mantra, create a job to keep a job, was sort of born in the media. And I was seen sort of as one of the stewards of that movement. Well, circle to the conversation with Dan after seeing the success after our conversation. He's sitting on a beach, and I'll let you go from here, with Ryan, because he's known Ryan forever.
Yep.
And here we go.
Yeah. Scott graduated, got, right into entrepreneurship. I didn't do that. I got a real job. While I was there, I started a blog with one of my freshman year roommates in college called Employee Evolution, which was basically talking about how we were feeling as Gen Y entering the workforce, just feeling kind of like we were out of place, that we didn't fit in. And we were also trying to combat some of the criticisms about Gen Y, that we were narcissistic and difficult to work with. And ultimately we became, without this being the mission at all, the voice for Generation Y. We ended up getting interviews from the Wall Street Journal, New York Times. We were interviewed by Morley Safer at one point in time, being that voice for the generation, talking back to all this criticism. And that's how we met our business partner, a woman named Penelope Trunk, who wrote a book named Brazen Careerist. And we took that book and turned it into a social network for young professionals entering the workforce. Through Brazen Careerist, this network of just young people blogging about their experiences and talking to one another, providing peer-to-peer support. That's how I met Dan, and we became great, great friends. So going back to the beach, I'm sitting with Dan in Cape Cod, and Dan's harassing me the entire time because Dan's more like Scott. He's always working.
He's not a
relaxing
individual.
Yeah. I took him to this great beach called North Beach, out by the Seals, and there's just no one there. And he's like, so we get there, we put our blankets down, and he's like, so what are we doing now? And I'm like, this is what we're doing, Dan. And that was the day. Later on that day, we're sitting by the pool, and I've kind of had my fill of just my Dan time. I love him to death, but we all friends like that, especially if you're an introvert. You know what I'm talking about. And Dan's telling me about this guy he just got off the phone with that you have to meet. And I'm like, all right, Dan, all right, I get it. Just email me about it like a week from now when we're back in Boston. A week or so later, I get in touch with Scott, and a lot of back and forth, maybe a month or two before we really actually connected. And I learned about YEC, and I loved it. And at the time, I was kind of looking for my next jump into community building. And a couple weeks into YEC and being a part of that community, I realized that there was something special there that if we both were able to co-create together, we could turn it into the next great entrepreneurship organization. And that's really where it all began. Dan is literally the first chapter of our book, just explaining the power of connectivity. And what's interesting, take it a step further, Dan is actually writing the book that is in a lot of ways the extension of Superconnector in the fall, called Back to Human, about getting back to the human relationships that we all need to reconnect with.
It's just funny because at the end of the day, just sort of like bullet pointing it, an individual that we both obviously knew saw this synergy just by the way that they are innately born and have trained themselves, saw the opportunity like, well, look, I don't know if these guys are going to go build something bigger together, but clearly they have directionally the same path. How do I get these two people in a room? Even though he was smart enough to see, and I'm sure prepped both of us in a way, that we were fundamentally different human beings. And I think that's why we've been such great partners, because if you put two introverts or two extroverts in a room, it's a very different dynamic. I think that what I've learned in this relationship is sometimes it's best, to take a deep breath and shut up and listen.
Sure.
And I think he's learned from me in a lot of ways that sometimes you need to be a bit more out there and aggressive and say your piece. But I think that's what allowed us to build not just great company, but great communities and sort of build that ethos directly into what we do.
Well, I will say, I'm a little jealous of what you guys have on some level. My producer was doing some of the research for this, and she was like, they've started like everything together since like 2010, 2011. And you don't hear that often in partnerships. And you guys are like perfect blend, because what happens is oftentimes we try to partner with people who are just like us, which turns out to be ultimately a disaster. And you read a book like Gino Wickman's Rocket Fuel, and the importance of like having a visionary and having an integrator. And when you have two visionaries, it's a problem. If you have two integrators, it's a problem. So whether visionary is a CEO and the integrator is kind of like a COO operations person, because somebody like you and me, I'm assuming thousands of ideas. The follow through isn't always the greatest.
Well, we have a joke in the company that, and thankfully it's actually, it's a stretch the way we say it, but I call it the 1 out of 10 decision. It's like, I might be wrong 9 times, but when I'm right that one, that's the one that matters. Now, they give me a little more credit saying it's more likely like 3 out of 10. But the point being is that if I tried all 10, like without somebody being a stopgap for me, oh my God, the world would explode. Like, I use that Chris Farley line from Saturday Night Live. If I ran the world my way, I'd be living in a van down by the river, eating a steady diet with government cheese. So, but that's the value, I think, in understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are, but again, from a human level, respecting the other side to make changes and modify your own weaknesses with their strengths as well. And I think that's why we've been so successful.
It took me a while to figure that out too. Like you said, what you've done for me is allowed me to become more assertive. And remember those first couple years, we were doing all of the things that just came out of your head. And
that didn't work.
We were in trouble. But, once I got to that point where I became confident enough to kind of help guide us and take the vision that you had and turn it into something special, we really, we had something great, and we continue to have that now.
That's awesome. Well, it's also funny to hear you when Dan said like, "Oh, I have somebody to introduce you to," and you're like, "Yeah," like trying to like filter through the ideas of like, again, people are always throwing things at you, and somebody like you ultimately is again the filter of like what's the gold or what's the signal amongst the noise of what Scott's talking about and those kind of things, and what are the things we're going to implement and really follow through on. So like I said, knowing so many like entrepreneurs and successful businesses and successful partnerships and not so successful partnerships, it's very rare that you see what you guys have. So it's as an entrepreneur who's been an entrepreneur solo for the last 14 years, I'm not only a little jealous, but it's it's beautiful to see. So the book again, and this is to me like where I feel like most drawn is almost like towards you, because this is like this is like not a world I'm used to.
Uncharted territory.
Yeah, right. So it's like I want to like dissect you and like how does like an introvert work, and how do you work with somebody like Scott, and that kind of stuff. But I actually kind of let's talk about. So the title is Superconnector. And I'm glad you like the idea that I had, or like through reading it, was that you guys are really trying to change the conversation, or at least move away from the word networking. Because even myself, like I've tried to come up with another word. I haven't figured out a great word, and I hate using the word networking because again, it comes across very transactional. It's like flinging business cards at a business event. So you guys are really trying to change the conversation and use the word connector instead. So what would you say is like the difference between a networker, a traditional networker, and a connector, or even a superconnector in this case?
Yeah, I think that a networker is an activity you're taught in a business book that tells you how to win at business. That's like sort of that thinking, like you do these steps and you'll build a network, and then that network will somehow reward you. And it is transactional because it's through the me lens, it's through the my goals lens, and what am I trying to win at lens, instead of being a bit more worldly and looking at people as people. And I think the connector philosophy, similar to what we just talked about a moment ago with Dan, is this idea that you're not just in this moment of I'm going to a networking event, that mindset, but rather I am a good human trying to help other good humans to improve upon the general tone of humanity and business. And I may at some point receive profit in whatever profit means to me. It could be rewarding through friendship, rewarding through financial gain, but that is not my intent when I say John meets Sam and Sam meet John. Or going out of my way to make sure John meets Sam instead of they just happen to be in the same room and I just know both of them. And so I think it's just this different philosophy that we, believe in, that humanity was the goal of networking. It was to reinforce the human touch. That was like any 1.0 design. There was good intent. And then the 2.0 was people following the 1.0ers and putting their spin on it. And that sort of began the drift. And then there's the 3.0 version, which is the bastardization of the entire process, like every other thing from marketing to advertising to whatever, where it's now how do we growth hack it? How do we convert it? How do we funnel it? Sure. How do we cheat time on it? Like all these things that are fundamentally very much thinking like a tech mindset or a hacking mindset. And I think that's a big problem because the reality today is, you saw Facebook making an announcement today even about how they are trying to get back to meaningful relationship building because they're realizing their newsfeed product is creating, unintentional divisiveness around, these kinds of different areas, and brands are being too abrasive in selling message and product instead of selling community, which was the initial intent. So I think like everything else, it's just dialing it back, taking a step back, realizing what your intent was and putting your right heart and right mind back into your intention.
And step one is, from what I gather from the book, is really identifying the type of connector kind of you are. What would be, and you guys break it down to 3 different types of connectors. What are those connectors? As he drinks his cup of coffee. Scott passes it over to Ryan while Ryan is drinking.
So we've got the creator, the... God, now I'm drawing a blank.
I'll give you the book.
Here,
my pages are falling apart because I've opened the book so many times. It's in here somewhere.
The funny thing is...
thinker, enabler,
thank you,
and connection executor.
I'm the executor.
Yeah. The funny thing about this is why, once again, going back to Jason's initial regard of, hey, how about we do an afternoon interview? It's like we're all holding like caffeinated coffee and drinks. My son didn't sleep the whole night last night. So
what day is it?
But yeah, I think it's the key with the thinker is it's the person that's coming up with sort of the big plan, the big idea, and then obviously people like the execution. It's how do we execute upon the plan? It's putting yourself into these buckets to realize where your strengths lie, so you can find contextually the right person to work with and integrate with. I think that what we've learned in our process is almost by accident, the yin and yang, if you will, the total bipolar opposites on a lot of levels actually works to the advantage of community building because, if you're like me, again, that type A extrovert, thinker, you're going to approach relationship building in a certain way. It might not be as nuanced initially. You might be thinking, again, almost too networky that you have to pull yourself back from because it's just you're built to almost come off that way, even if it's not your intent. Yep. And then you watch somebody who's sort of on the other side of that, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. That seems a lot smarter. That seems like if I just change this little cog in the machine, I can ultimately create something like a much more meaningful relationship if I just, tone it down a little bit, or if I, make sure that my thinking and my patterns of thinking are a bit more aligned with the other side. And I think like anything else, one of the cool things about our journey is that I don't claim to say that I was born, or I don't think Ryan was born with like these ideas innate. We did a lot of trial and error and mistakes. I mean, I've made mistakes in business relationships and personal relationships early in my career where you are thinking like, oh man, all I want to do is win. All I want to do is get there. But by putting yourself and defining who you are, you begin to give yourself lanes. And I think those lanes are ultimately meant to ensure that, one, you don't cross them and that thereby cross your ethos, your mission, your thesis. But at the same time, it really gives you perfect vision into how to actually achieve mutual wins from that vantage point. So it really does help.
It's funny. I was interviewed by Shopify recently for a new thing that they're doing, and they asked me like, "What is something somebody needs to do to become better relationships?" And I said, "Work on themselves, like self-awareness,
self-awareness."
And that was not the sexy answer she was wanting, but I'm like, I've come to realize, like, I've been working on myself for 14 years. The more I work on myself, the more I get to know myself, the more comfortable I am with myself, the better my relationships get, ultimately.
We talk about this, too. I mean, like, the 2 biggest traits, or even 3 biggest traits of being a connector, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and curiosity.
Yes.
Because, again, these key elements are what is innately human, but more importantly, your ability to see and actually feel as a human. I think like technology has fundamentally destroyed or put a distortion field in some ways around those elements, or what we are supposed to take away from conversations and make them less meaningful. I think that technology is become this is who I am instead of its original intent, which was, I am a human looking to put myself out there via a platform and amplify my humanity. Now the technology is sort of supplanting the humanity in the first place. But I think that's a big part of what we've seen, in our communities. It's the people that are the best, most amazing connectors and who do win in daily business life simultaneously, but again, with the right intent, the right motives, are people that are incredibly empathetic. That are, I go back to the first time I asked you for an introduction to Derek Coburn, somebody that's in the book. You could have very easily just sent an email and said, just got interviewed, met Scott, great guy, you should be in the book too. He wanted me, please connect. But that's not what you did. You put together a 3-minute personalized video about what the book was about, who I was, who Derek was, and really made it a much more impactful relationship. You amplified your humanity through technology rather than letting it supplant it. So I think that emotional intelligence, that understanding of, wow, Scott's really trying to create this book with Ryan that is, meaningful, it's up my alley, but it's something that could really be value add. And then adding to that this idea that you should be a part of this journey. You saw context, you saw the visual, you saw the intonations of your voice. You could tell this wasn't just like, I'm networking. This was you generally being a connector. And that comes back down to that emotional intelligence quotient.
And is there a difference between a connector and a superconnector? I don't know if I'm digging into it too much, but
I think it's just there are people that are tradespeople at it. Like there's folks like the three of us, right? That are truly like, this is not only a job, if you will, but it's just how we are built. It's how we see the world. We don't see the world in, look at this person's title or look at that business activity I want to involve myself in. It's look at the community I'm surrounded by and how can I impact and create that value. I think Superconnector, first and foremost, it's almost like a title that you can't bestow on yourself. Because that,
dude, I was gonna bring it up. But I didn't want to because I just didn't know where you guys.
No. I think it's a very valid point. If you don't, nobody would say like, "Hi, I'm Ryan Paugh. I'm a Superconnector."
Sure.
Because that's basically saying, "Hi, I'm a networker." I am trying to spin this for a LinkedIn, bio line, to do keyword search, right?
Yeah.
Like that. And again, it goes back down to you are amplifying your technology or thinking of conversion instead of if people know you're a connector, they're going to know you're a connector.
Exactly. No, it's so funny because when I look at that LinkedIn byline and it says like connector, I'm like, no, you're an asshole. You're not a connector.
Right. But that's the thing. You can't. This is not pageantry. This is not meant to be a shade of lipstick on the pig. This is meant to be just you're known as this. And so I think the super connectors and the connectors are, the people that do this as a daily exercise. The super connectors, I would say, are the ones that are the 1%ers. Again, not through design to get to the 1%, but have been bestowed that sort of title and relevancy by their constituencies. Because again, I've met people like that. I am a super connector.
We hope this book doesn't create just sort of a surge of super connectors on LinkedIn now with that title, but we hope that people.
Well, it's good. I mean, this title connector and super connector has been again kind of abused. I think in the marketplace, and it's been. So even when people call me a connector or super connector, I kind of feel like weird about it because again, people put it in like their LinkedIn profile, and it's like them saying like I'm inspirational. I'm like, no, you don't say you're. Somebody else says you're inspirational.
And I think at the same time, there's so many of the real super connectors that we want to see showcased, like the ones in the book and others that were.
I will say, like knowing a lot of people in this space, you showcase pretty much the most, like if not all of them. Like the people who I know, they wouldn't identify themselves as super connectors, but other people do, like behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff. It was amazing to see how many people I know are in this book.
And hopefully people learn from those people. That's what we want, people to learn by example from the right people, the real super connectors that are out there doing their thing, helping people, building community through whatever industry they're in, whatever community they're in, and doing real good. And that's what we hope to showcase through this and through the index that we're going to create later on this year to really showcase people all around the country doing great things in a lot of different fields.
That was actually really cool. I don't know if you could talk about that. All I know is that like there's a Facebook post and I started getting notifications about
A lot.
it. I'm like, what is this
You
about?
were tagged a lot.
And it's brilliant.
It's funny, right? I think we are so, speaking about Forbes, we talked about earlier with Kyle, Forbes 30 under 30 is obviously a big franchise for them. You have the Inc. 30 under 30, you've got the Cranes 40 under 40, you've got all these lists, right? And again, whether the pageantry is part of what, the process or not, the reality for us is there really isn't some sort of group other than what I'll call some, either private group, like again, Mastermind Talks, that is the goal of that community is very specific, but there's no public sort of notification of these are the people you should actually listen to.
Yeah.
We're hearing whoever gets the loudest voice, the biggest headline, the largest book of the day, but we're not actually seeing this groundswell of these are the people that actually are the ones. And what I think Ryan was really great at doing in the book, we talked at length about who do we want to feature. And I think there's a lot of pressure when you're talking to publishers and others that you want to make sure that you're including enough people that also help you, promote the book and all this other stuff. So to a certain extent, it's like, oh, okay, well, do we want to, just try to ask every A-list, by definition, A-list meaning media personality type to be a part of this book? But I think Ryan, early on before we started writing it, we're like, we got to talk to the accountants. We got to talk to the, the person that's painting houses at scale, but doing it a certain way in a local town. And I think a lot of that showed in the book too, because we didn't want this to just be another piece of technorati, where it's a TechCrunch headline of, oh, this is the guy or this is the woman. But rather that it's just showing once again that this is an approach that people can take on.
Yeah.
And that is not this lofty idealist, utopia, but, this is a guy who spent 30 years doing the same thing over and over again, worked really hard, and now he's one of the most well-known and respected, people in a town that everybody goes through him. Was that his intent? No, but he did a series of very specific, methodical things because he wanted to achieve a certain lifestyle in where he set roots. So, and then we talk about that. It's an accountant in Homestead, Florida.
Those are my favorite people in the book. The accountant in Homestead, the window salesman in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and what they've done, the real tangible sense of community that they've built around them to build their business and support others in the community as well.
It brings that, the thing is, sometimes when people hear, they hear me speak or they hear about the podcast or whatever the case may be, they're like, that's he's in the event space, he's in that circle of authors, and that's what you do at that level. You don't do that if you are a window salesman. You don't do that if you are a plumber. It's complete. And so you guys are doing a great job of bridging.
We wanted to remove that from the equation.
Yeah.
I think there's enough things out there talking about the one percenters, and no disrespect again to the Gary Vaynerchuks and all those kind of great folks. They've achieved incredible success and will continue to do so. But that is a one percenter type level success in most cases.
100%.
And most people are just trying to get to the top 50%, top 60%, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's about realigning your goals towards what you actually want. It's thinking about your world in, again, the context of who you are, what you do, what you want, and trying to reframe that in a way that is actually meaningful to your lifestyle.
Got to know. I have to know because I have some people reach out to me who are very early stage, and I hear about some of their struggles or their obstacles, and I was like, I'm so far removed from that. It doesn't even come on my radar that is something that somebody's struggling with. So when writing this book, it's specifically, again, talking to the guy who sells windows and again, that 60%, I guess you could say. Is there anything that you saw that you're that they asked you or anything that they struggle with in particular that you're oh my God, that didn't even come across my mind that would be a pain point?
Good question.
Yep.
I think at that level, you're just thinking about things fundamentally differently. And some of the things that, our interviewee in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who was selling windows and siding and doors, is just the abundance of choice for amplifying your message and building community. Do I use Facebook? Do I use LinkedIn? Do I go on this radio show? Do I join this entrepreneurship organization? Do I join this one? And just that paralysis that comes along with that. I think that is one of the biggest problems that people face, is just all of these elements that people say that you have to be doing. You have to be doing ads on Facebook. You have to join this group because you're going to meet the best people. And it all comes back to, again, the thing that I think is most important about this book is that these are all ideas. You don't have to do anything. Know yourself, build that sense of self-awareness, and you'll know what things you should be doing, because you'll know that those things will bring out the best you that you possibly can. I think that is something that most people get stuck on, especially early on, is just the element of choice and knowing exactly what they should be investing their time in.
I thought that it was actually interesting. One thing that I found really interesting, again, from what I'll call the non-name brands, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean, the ones you will learn about for the first time in this book, they had a real problem, like, talking about it from like a methodology perspective, right? Because, and that's what's so great about this, because they didn't think about it in this constructive, I'm going to do this exact series of steps. Like, again, the networkers do. I'm going to take this step to lead to that step to do this step. Instead, over a lifetime of a career, they found things that worked really well for them and things that really didn't. And they just took it in and built upon it. But they did it in such an innocent way that they have such problems identifying, like at what points in their career even I decided this was the step for me, but rather, that's just what I do. Like in the Homestead, Florida example, one of the biggest things that I found really rewarding, especially as now a family man with 4 kids, is that this gentleman did not want to just be a business guy in town. He wanted to set roots in this town and show the town, like, this is where I'm going to live. I want to go all in every part and every facet of this, regardless if it benefits me or not, regardless if it's related to my business philosophy or not. How he met people was bringing families together at private events just to, again, build that community that also led to business in some cases. He had this great mantra in the book. He talks about, good business makes for good friends, but good friends don't make for good business. But just this idea of, really turning this into a lifestyle that led to reward instead of reverse engineering reward into lifestyle, which I think too many people do today. Yeah. If I live this way and do these things, and I can hit these metrics, I'm going to get this goal. If you have this amorphous goal that is just, I want a good life, I want to be successful, and I want to feel not just success from a financial perspective, but successful as a well-rounded person, which I think is what most of the Superconnector class would say. Like even you, Jason, you wouldn't say, I'm doing mastermind talks to make money. You would say
it would be a bad business.
It'd be a terrible business. But that's what I'm saying. You're saying because you enjoy the surroundings, the world, the environment, the people. Yeah. You can't picture doing anything else, just like we can't, because you're constantly surrounded by people that you're just in awe of. But that's part of the ROI, if you will, right? Absolutely. The ROI is not financial in this case. The ROI is just, I really like hanging out with really smart people. I like being selective with my time. And those that I'm going to be selective with are truly the ethos of what I want my life to represent.
Yeah, I mean, if I can provide for my family, like basic wants and needs, and surround myself the remainder of the year with some of my favorite people and support them and be their biggest fan, I mean, that dude, I can do that for the rest of my life.
That's the win.
So there's so many ways there's 2 ways specifically I want to kind of take this. I'm really, and again, drawn to like being in the presence of like an introvert right now. You're like a unicorn. This is
That's funny.
So I want to take it in that direction. I really do. I want to know, like, especially even not from a business partnership perspective, because I think of that guy who was, early stage entrepreneur, and they had the makeup. Like, he was very much an introvert operations guy. His business partner was very extroverted and visionary, but they were doing things a little ass backwards. He was at the events, his business partner wasn't, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious, like, as an introvert, do you, what does relationships look like to you? Like, do you leave most of the relationship building up to Scott? Do you do it? Do you focus on relationships as well, but in your own way?
Well, I do. I remember when we first came together too, I had sort of this just feeling of like insecurity about the fact that I wasn't being as forward as Scott was, putting himself out there, being the Scott that Scott is, and being more in the background. And it took me a while to build up that self-awareness in myself that, well, I'm still bringing a lot to the table as a connector, but I do it in fundamentally different ways, and I've gotten more comfortable with that over the years. So I think that's important for introverts like me. And then I think what I do well, and a lot of other introverts do well, is they sit back and they listen. And I think all connectors need to have that curiosity, but introverts have that leg up in the sense that they are good listeners and they will sit back and dissect things. And I can't think of anything more important when you're a connector than just sitting back and listening to what people have to say, what they're passionate about, what they're trying to do, what their challenges are, and then using that connector mentality that you have to just figure out, how can I help them? What resources and what people do I know, or what people do I know who have resources that can support them? And that's how I do it. I am just dissecting constantly the conversations that I hear, things that I see other people talking about. A lot of the times, the extroverts that really have no problem putting them out there and finding ways that I can support them, and in much quieter introvert-like ways, connecting and supporting behind the curtain. And I think there's a lot of value there that it doesn't get seen because it's not so public, but the people that you're connecting with and the people that you're forming this bond with through those exchanges, they see it, and that's what really matters.
What was really funny too, early on, there was this moment, it was a couple years into YEC, where I remember saying to Ryan, I'm just getting this weird vibe from some of our members, like they're afraid to talk to me. And I don't mean this like in like, oh, look who Scott is. I just mean genuinely like they won't respond with me. And he would then turn around and say, it's intimidating. And that was an eye-opener for me because, again, like we were just talking about, like you see Ryan as the unicorn, which is, by the way, funny because it's an inside joke between us and something else. But it's this idea that we just are myopic in our life and we just think a certain way. I just thought, if I talk to somebody, if I walk up, say hi, what do you do, all this kind of stuff, whatever your conversational tone is, that's just how it's done. But you get nuanced. And you can, as a connector, learn to identify the kind of person you're even talking to make them comfortable in the surroundings. But I remember going to Ryan, I'm like, Ryan, I just don't get it, man. Like, I'm having a problem, like, talking to some of these people. And then Ryan would say, like, I know, I've been talking to them. And, it's not that they don't like you or anything like that. They just, they see you on TV. They see you, doing these speeches and, being the sort of face of this community. And for people like that, they don't know how to process that. And that was an eye-opener for me because I at first was taking it very personally. But I think that was the wrong way of looking at it. I was looking at it, unfortunately, through the selfish lens of, well, who are these people not to want to talk to me, which was really stupid, versus taking 5 extra seconds and realizing, like, oh, there's a reason for this. It's because I'm trying not to adapt to the surroundings rather than create the surroundings. And I think learning that context, which we talk a lot about in the book, understanding, but also, really feeling the context of not just words, but situation, really helps you to better define how you will work, connect, talk, and interact with other people. But that was a huge eye-opener for me early on.
And is there something that you wish, like when extroverts, you first connect with the extrovert, is there something you wish that they did or they understood about like how to kind of work with you on some level? Not work with you, that sounds absolutely terrible, but like it's just like
wish that introverts knew about connecting with me, or that
like if I were to connect with you, what are some things that you wish I knew? Like, should I be more, should I try to push the conversation more? Should I pull back a little more? Do like extroverts, are they a little too forceful?
Ask good questions of them, and push them into the conversation, make them feel included. I think that's very important. But also, know when to sit back and listen. And I think that's difficult sometimes. But if you train yourself to just maybe take that extra second to decide whether or not you should open your mouth or to just kind of continue to listen on something, that's all it takes. Just a little bit of awareness of the person that you're with, and take the time to kind of understand when you're talking to someone where they might fit on the spectrum of introvert or extrovert, so you know how to handle yourself in that conversation.
What are some great ways to identify that, you think?
Introverts tend to hang out in the background. They tend to just be the one that's more silent. I mean, at the end of the day, when Scott and I walk into a room together, it's pretty easy to know who's the introvert and who's the extrovert. It's not always that simple, but we make it pretty easy when we're together. But they're probably sort of in the background. They're probably just analyzing the situation, not doing much of the talking, probably nodding their head a lot, and they are listening and they're engaged, but they probably have a hard time, leading the conversation. So to lead it for them, but to also sit back and listen once you've set them up with some really great questions, is great to do. And I think like it goes into an important part of our book, which is asking great questions, right? What is a good question? Too often, I think people ask questions like, what do you do? Or how can I help you? Which, shit, these are loaded questions.
Terrible questions. But
yeah.
we should talk about that. Actually,
But what we like to, have people start conversations out with. In fact, like this is one of the main questions that we have our community managers at the community company use versus things like, how can I help you? Which is like banned from our company. Is what are you working on right now that you're excited about? Everyone has something that they're excited about right now that they can talk about and work through. And through that conversation, you're going to open doors into areas of individuals, especially the introverts, that otherwise would have been kept shut. And I think offering up that opportunity to have a conversation with someone about something that they're truly passionate about and willing to talk about if they're given the opportunity versus a loaded question like, how can I help you? Or what do you do? It's going to do a lot of good, and it's going to really help you get past that sort of outer layer.
You know what's interesting too, circling back to your question, Jason, I think a lot of extroverts give themselves a bad rap without realizing it. Because sometimes when they're talking to introverts, and I've been guilty of this in the past, because they're not getting, in their own mind, they're not getting back from the other person what they're trying to get, which is usually because they're not actually structuring the conversation in a meaningful way. They are dominating the conversation. Therefore, that becomes the, oh, this guy's so self-centered. Oh, this guy, all he does is talk about himself. He doesn't shut the, and that mentality is ultimately the impression you're leaving on who could be a very thoughtful person on the other side of that conversation. And so I think, to identify by, again, starting with these good questions, starting to build conversation, realizing that listening and being silent are not always mutually exclusive. Understanding that there is some truth to the idea that when someone is listening, they're not boring. They're analyzing. I mean, we have friends that would never walk into a conference to save their lives. But if you get them in a setting like a 5-person dinner, they are just on, and they will be incredibly engaged, and they'll be intellectually relevant, and they're going to lead conversations because they've set that surrounding. They've created the environment. But in moments where you can't create the environment and you're forced into one, it can be daunting. So I would just advise, as the extrovert who talks to now introverts very differently than I used to. I mean, methodically different. And again, not to like kid hold hands or anything like that. Like just because I'm being respectful of understanding, hey, you're different than I am. Okay, let's drive a different way. I think it's just taking a step back and realizing that silence does not mean not interested. That you should never be trying to dominate a conversation because you think the other person is not talkative. That means you're not doing a good job of creating the environment by which you should be having a conversation.
We touched on the importance of questions, and there's actually a chapter in the book. And I think it's definitely great because you guys kind of snickered at like, how can I help you?
It's the worst question ever. Absolute worst question.
And I fundamentally believe like the quality of your questions will determine the quality of your conversation. Why? Let's dig into this right out of the gate because it's such a big question, that gets asked in networking settings, and I hate it as well. How can I help you? Why is it so problematic?
Oh man, I can go for hours on this.
It's just an empty gesture in a way.
It was the 1.0 networking that had well intention that got bastardized. Because I don't think either of us believe that when the question was conceived whenever, that people were genuinely like thinking like, oh, if I ask now at this point in the conversation, how can I help you? I'm going to be seen as the great guy. No, they were genuinely curious. But what's happened? It's become a bullet point on people's blogs. And I'm guilty of this too. When I started, I remember giving interviews about how you should ask this question because I was naive, because I wasn't war-torn. The community mindset wasn't where my head was at that time. So I didn't like analyze this stuff. But once you do, you realize, man, was I wrong. Like I went on TV and said, this is the number one thing you should say. I remember that interview. It was with J.J. Ramberg and MSNBC. I'm going to live that down the rest of my life now when this book comes out. But the reality is that it shows thoughtlessness. It shows you want to get out of the conversation or be seen in a certain way. It's become a social script. And this is just the example. Obviously, there's many questions that are also socially scripted this way now, because it just seems like at this point, there should be a prompt. And it feels so even if you're trying to be genuine, it feels so anything but genuine, that it comes off the wrong way and it could screw up the last 20 minutes of relevant conversation you've had. Yeah. And so I think it's about really just taking 5 seconds to say to yourself, what are you trying to achieve? And basically, instead of using the social scripts to get there, using just that meaningful, real dialogue. Oh, you know, like Ryan said, the question we always talk about is, what are you working on that you're excited about right now? If you can't enter into that conversation after hearing all that context, something that instead of prompting, how can I help you, but rather prompting with the actual offer of help, like the specific things by which you can do, then you are not a connector. You are socially scripted.
Another reason why that question sucks, though, is, and I'll give you an example. I mean, we help a lot of startups, and we work with a lot of the early stage entrepreneurs like we were talking about before, and a lot of them don't know what kind of help that they actually need. And to put out a question like, hey, how can I help you, just adds to a lot of noise that might actually not be the right direction to go in. I think if you open up just the opportunity for them to tell you the things that they're going through and the things that they're working on and where they're getting stuck, it's a much better way to be able to support them and to connect the dots between what's really going on and where there's resources to support them. Yeah. So I like to put myself in that seat versus, them being sort of in control necessarily of like what they think they can access from my network. I know my network better than they do, and I like to put myself in the driver's seat to make the best connections possible. And you can't do that when you ask, how can I help you? You can do that when you ask them, what are you working on, and dissect it and do the connecting for yourself.
You're also making the case when you ask a question like that, not only do they know what kind of help they want, but that they even understand they have a problem or a challenge. Here's an example. We talk about in the book an example where one of the entrepreneurs had said, I'm looking for funding. Okay. Now that can mean a million different things.
Sure.
But if you actually did the context conversation just a bit longer, you would have found out that this guy's going to waste a year of his life on angel investing because he's not ready. But his kind of business could very well get a business loan or a line of credit or something else. And so here you are saying, oh, I know all these angel investors. Well, you just put this guy on to something that made you feel good about yourself that you could help, without actually asking yourself, is that the help that's actually making sense? Mm-hmm. So, I think a lot of this just gets avoided by getting people, pulling that curiosity out of yourself to pull things out of other people. Good context. We talk about it ad nauseum in the book because most people, I'm sure there's going to be some, Amazon review snob that's like, well, this just sounds so obvious, and how could, this is some nonsense tip. Everybody knows this. And then you say to yourself, cool, let me survey the last 5 conversations you had and tell me if you live it. Mm-hmm. Then you can tell me that it's just so obvious.
I don't know if you noticed how red Scott got in the face and the neck region when he answered that question.
Well, because you know what it is, Jason? You know what it is? I think that I see myself a lot in the mistakes that have become our mandate and thesis. Sure. Because that's how you learn. That's how you get evolved. And yet, you've got so many great resources today of amazing people. I think, I don't know if it's Ryan Holiday or Tim or one of these guys that talks about, all you need to do is follow the people that are doing it right, and you can learn 20 times faster than just simply reading a book or whatever. This is out there. I mean, we've compiled the greatest minds of our generation in this subject matter, but they themselves live this every day. Mm-hmm. Yet networking conceptually is still such a premise and is still followed so methodically that it just does make your blood boil a little bit to be like, you're going to spend all this time anyway.
Yeah.
Why not take the extra 10 minutes and diagnose yourself before trying to learn more?
Yeah.
And realize that your foundation is off. Your general ideas are off, because there's still not a week that goes by. I'll give you one last example where we don't get some stupid email that's like, hey, Ryan, hey, Scott, would love to work with you. Let's set up lunch. What would you like to work on? Would you like to work on a partnership? Would you like to be a member? Yeah. Would you like to talk? The people don't fundamentally either spend the time or, again, have gotten into that, I only can write 3-line emails because that's what converts better at 10% versus 15 versus hey, if you gave me an extra sentence, I actually would have maybe given a shit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I remember it was Ryan. One thing I love about Ryan Holiday, he definitely does not mince words. He is who he is, and he makes his viewpoints kind of heard. And one thing, I don't know if I was talking to him or something like that, but he's like, when people ask me how may they how can they help me? He's like, I wouldn't use your help. He's like, I can hire somebody. Like if I know I have a problem, I'll just hire an expert in that space and those kind of, or when it also was in the context of like somebody who wanted to be like a mentee and they're like, oh, how can I help you or whatever? And he's like, I'm not going to, invest my time teaching you how to help me when I could just hire an expert. But I think one of the, and you guys touched on this, and I kind of jokingly again kind of point at you because it's great to see like how passionate you are. But like this is not, so many authors I know write a book because they're like, oh, this is there's a gap in the market and I can, I'll learn about this subject.
Right. I'll hack the charts.
You guys have lived this. Yep. And also I honor you immensely for saying like, I used to do things differently. You know what I mean? And I went by the book and it wasn't the right approach. And now, I'm kind of spreading what I learned in the gospel. But I think another kind of idea around the whole, how can I help you question, and to me, like it does more harm than good, because we all have a deep desire to feel seen and understood and those kind of things. And if you have a conversation with me for 5 minutes and then you end on how can I help you, that means that 5 minutes was pointless, was useless to what you said. You should be able to identify like what are the ways I can help you, and you do that through really just great questions. I love the question that you guys use, like my go-to questions. Like really when I meet somebody, there's 3 things I'm looking for. I'm looking for where they are, where they want to go, what obstacles are in the way, and what are they really great at, so that I can solve somebody else's problems with their skill set. And the 2, do you know Clay Bear? So Clay gave me this question, and it wasn't in this context. He uses it all the time for the last like 2 years to in his like consulting and stuff like that, which is if we were to meet a year from today in this breather space, for example, in New York City with a bottle of champagne, what are we celebrating? And it's a really kind of fun question that gets people like future focused and gives you great answers. My follow-up question to that is, in order, let's say it's to hit New York Times. My follow-up question to that is, in order to achieve that, what is something that you need to solve or overcome? And again, those 2 questions just lead to gold. And there's just it works so well, as opposed to like people who reach out to me or early on in conversation, they're like, what are you struggling with right now? And I don't think I've ever given a good answer to that.
But here's the funny thing too, Jason. It's a 2-step process. And let's say you're really good at the first step. If you don't do the second step, you miss the whole fundamental point of the exercise. And the second step is, what do you do with that information? I think Steve Sims talks about in the book, The Bluefish Mutual Friend, how after a conversation, he literally does the most simplistic thing in the world. He'll go into his contacts app, into the notes section, and he'll write down where I was, what 3 things we talked about, whatever. And the reason is because you're continuing the conversations later. Or next time you see the person, or they're going to be at an event, you can at least have context to make it like seamless. We talk about all the time, there's some entrepreneurs, and we talk about like Michael Roderick in the book, who has like literally the most complex yet effective CRM, self-made CRM out of an Excel spreadsheet you've ever seen in my life.
So I've known Michael for years. Yesterday was the first time we've met face-to-face. That's the guy who was actually I met at Chelsea Market. And he brought out this little piece of paper. Well, he had a little notebook, and I was talking to him about something, and he's like, do you mind if I share like a concept with you? And he went on for like 4 pages of like graphs and all this kind of stuff.
But that's how he thinks.
Absolutely.
But I think the point is that you need to create a system, because if you are like, I like to think of it as like a context detective. You can't cheat the human brain. You're not going to remember every single thing. And if you want to give the impression that you really care, it's not a cheat to write it down. It's like, not next time because I remembered things about the conversation because I reminded myself, that you're going to be like, oh wow, you hacked my conversation. Because no, it's you were thoughtful enough to actually care enough to write it down, so that next time we connected, or if you were in another conversation where it was meaningful, you could flip to whatever your system was. And so I think the second part of great questions is, what are you doing to make the context worthwhile? What are you doing to get the answers in a format and a means by which you as a connector can create more value based on what you've learned? And so I think that is, again, can be as simple as the Steve Sims, I'm going to open up my contacts app and do something, or an iPad or whatever it is. Or again, it could be this more complex CRM. But the key is, it's got to be whatever your system of comfort is. There is, again, like we give examples in the book. These are examples to show the diversity of systems, but they are not meant to be, do this system. Right. It's just meant to sort of show. Some people like to, I don't want to say rate their contacts. I don't think that's Michael's intention. I think he's just trying to easily classify people in his network so that he can easily use his cheat search of, okay, I'm looking for the A type with this, keyword search like sports marketing or whatever, and easily find that. But to each their own, but make sure you're taking that relevance with you.
Yeah.
Because that is the treasure chest.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely made it a practice that as soon as I connect with somebody, either I have a notebook with me, like a tiny notebook, because I usually don't want to pull up my phone because science have shown that if you have a cell phone on a table, the level of intimacy kind of suffers because of it. Or what I'll do is after an interaction, when I walk away, I remember hearing the philosophy of like have a small bladder when you go to networking events, so like go to the washroom and then write notes. But I'll walk away and I'll head outside and I'll do an audio recording and I'll save it to my phone. Then I send it to my assistant. But then like that's my assistant. But capturing that is crucial because if you do all this digging, you get all this gold and you just leave it, you'll forget about it. And it's those little interesting points about a conversation to what you said that like when you meet that person 2 years from now, you could say, how's your daughter doing or those kind of things. And that
last time we talked, you told me you were going on a business trip to this place. How'd that work out?
Yeah.
Did you get what you need accomplished? Like it just leads to this natural progression of relationship instead of these stop and start moments.
So how do you, and this is a big kind of golden question in the relationship building space is I don't say prioritizing, but like almost, on some level, prioritizing relationships. And how does that change between, do you guys have different philosophies on that? What does that look like for you guys?
First and foremost, being able to say no, I think is a very important thing for everyone to learn. And I think a lot of people who are natural connectors and want to help others have a hard time prioritizing, right? Because they want to help everyone. That's just genuinely they love to do. But especially in business, not all connections and opportunities like that create that mutual value that is worth your time. And you might not always be the best person to help someone either. And you might genuinely want to, and you have to understand when you shouldn't pursue those sort of things. So first and foremost, just being able to know like when you're not in the position to help someone, either because it's just not a great use of your own time or you're just not the best person, is important. And I think that is something that we all need to learn to do a little bit better.
Yeah, I think we have a bit of a cheat in this in one way, which is we obviously are in the relationship building business. And so we've created certain scalability in the form of other humans that think like us, that are allowing us to amplify how we think, what we do, and the relationship building practices we want to put in place. And so I think that it's sort of a cheat to say, look, if I can't take a personal call, then someone on my staff should be able to not only take that call, but deliver the same level of value to you. I hate to say it, but the reality that Ryan said is very true. You could become, at a certain point in your life, very comfortable with the community you surround yourself with. And you're not necessarily looking to just build and build and build and build and build, because then you're just stretching yourself more and more. So other than the saying no, I think it's better defining your selectivity as you go. Because at the end of the day, and again, people may hate you for this, and I think you have to accept that. The more selective you are, the more the meaningful relationships will become even more meaningful.
Sure.
And I think that is valuable, because the difference becomes, if John wants to become part of the meaningful relationship group, and he's just like pinging you on, message and whatever, you might get back, you might not, time permitting, whatever. But if you are tripled down on the 10, 20 people that are truly the people in your life, and one of them is saying you need to meet this person, well, that selectivity that you've honed and created around yourself allows you to then prioritize.
Yeah.
And so I think you become, initially when you're just starting out in building relationships, like all of us, like we're all born into the world with knowing no one except your parents.
Sure.
And so you have to go and build and find your selectivity. But once you've honed it, I think that there is a natural effect that comes, that the more selective you are, the actual more valuable relationships that will come from it.
Yeah.
But in an organic way, in a way that is comfortable for you, and in a way that is not you making decisions about prioritizing, but rather others prioritizing for you.
Yeah.
I think that's the differential when you've become a certain level of scale.
No, I think it's a good point that you made. I always say that we're drowning in connections and starving for community, and we see it all the time. We're more connected on the outside, more than ever because of social media and all this kind of stuff, and people are under this illusion. But then you see the effects of social isolation.
We talk all about that in the book, about the difference between people that think they're connected and connectors, right? I mean, we've conflated these two, or I don't think we have, but meaning the society as we know it has conflated these two in the social media age, and that has continued to feed this sort of complex around the networking machine, because this idea now is, if I get this vanity following, that must mean I'm important. I mean, we've met many people that you wouldn't want to be in a room with for more than 15 minutes that might have 1 million followers. Sure. But they've said something or done something or were early enough on a platform that, that just happened. And so I think it's just, again, the whole notion of there is no such thing as one size fits all. You have to define the life you want to live. And that comes with not just business, that comes with personal. I'd like to think that, I have the same friends that I had in high school today, probably more so than even in college. And I'm not necessarily looking for what I would say more friends like that, because that's a special place. Like, they will always get priority, right? Your deepest relationships. But then I've compartmentalized that. So that's my personal relationships. Like, I think you can have personal and business. I have many friends in business, but you compartmentalize different sort of tribes that you want to maintain. And then you're thinking about it from the perspective of time in the day and where you are. And, if I talk to this friend once a year, it doesn't matter if I talk to that friend 100 times a year, because we're never going to be any less, close. Yeah. So I think it's just about the balancing act of what's best for you.
Yeah. No, I think it's it's a hot topic, but the one thing you touched on, which I agree with 100%, is both of you guys touched on this, is almost like there's an opportunity cost. So if you say yes to somebody who is like a weak tie, or like I'm actually, full transparency, I made a Facebook post like 3-4 days ago saying like I'm tapped. Like, I'm actually at a point where I am tapped. I'm trying to figure out how to navigate this, because I reply to like 1,500 to 2,000 emails a month. That doesn't include Facebook messages. That doesn't include LinkedIn. Yep. I'm spending majority of my time replying to people. And that doesn't, people are like, you use like unsubscribe from emails. And I'm like, no, that's not the problem. The problem is like I'm having all these kind of open conversations. And the truth of the matter is that, like, again, when I'm saying yes to somebody who like read the book, and I'm super grateful they reached out to me and those kind of things. But if I'm investing time in that relationship, that kind of micro relationship, I'm saying no to relationships that truly matter. Well,
I think the other thing too is, we explored in the book, the best superconnectors in the world are productivity geniuses. I mean, that time is literally the most important thing. So whether, again, it is saying no, or having certain scripts that, again, are your words, are not meant to be, challenging, but, you've identified there's a certain number of similar things you're obviously going to, respond a certain way or start a certain way to make it easier. That's another. But I think that there's sort of this idea that you look at your inbox as an example. One of the things that I did early on, which drives my team crazy, by the way, like they hate this, but it's my thing, and they don't have a choice. Except him. Ryan would have a choice because he refuses to do it with me. But I have learned that I could avoid 25 back and forths on Slack, or 25 back and forth, stupid levels of email, if I take a 5-minute FaceTime call. Yeah. And so I started literally, like, especially with my CFO, like, we would just get into these Slack messages, and we both like love to hate Slack, right? Like everybody does. It's like it just goes and goes and goes and goes. But if we just jumped on for 5 minutes, this would be over. And so I think that it's also identifying the right platforms for you to actually have these connections and relationships with as well. And I don't mean like, is it Facebook or is it email? I mean, can you consolidate? We have a person in the book we talk about that when he wants to do meetings with multiple people, instead of doing one meeting at a time, he will bring 5 people into one place that obviously he feels that's comfortable, right? And it'll be just a simultaneous catch-up. And it's great because it's a connector tactic of getting people together, but at the same time, he's caught up with all of them at the same time. It's the same hour. So there's just different ways you have to look at your time, and different ways you have to look at your blocks, and different ways you have to look at your systems.
That's what Neil Strauss does. I don't know if are you familiar with Neil and his little process. So he does a dinner, I think it's like every week in LA or something like that, where if anybody wants to have like coffee with him or that kind of stuff, instead of doing all these 1-hour coffee dates, he'll just invite everybody for dinner. And I've taken that same approach, because then what he does is those that he really hits it off with, he'll be like, hey, do you want to come back to like my place, and we'll keep chatting. Yep. And my same philosophy, like I have the same philosophy when it comes to like the dinners that I host. Like people who want to connect with me or I've wanted to connect with them, if I can put them all together for a dinner, I can have a micro interaction with them and really at that point decide. Like, you can learn a lot about somebody in the first 30 seconds. If you really want to invest in that relationship, go further, or just, it was great to connect and we'll cross paths again soon type thing. So I think that's that's an important thing. It's an important thing to note. There's actually, it's funny, I wrote all these notes of things to talk about, and we actually talked about them all and more. Managing your network, good questions. How to find your own community. That's something we did not touch on, and I would love to end it on that. So, because this is, again, I think of like the people who reach out to me who are very early stage, who are not, A-type entrepreneurs. Like some people ask me, like, what's the best way to start your network? I'm like, go to a high price point event. Not realizing like that's such a privileged thing to say.
Just spend $25,000 on one of Joe's events.
Exactly,
and you're good.
Exactly. Yeah. So how does one, start? So they're clear on like the connector DNA that they kind of possess. They kind of know where they are, where they want to go. How does one kind of start to get that ball rolling?
Oh man, this is a great question.
One thing I'll start on, just because it really is just so important, and I think so many people just gravitate towards people that are just like them, is to, in some ways, just try to find people that push your boundaries and even make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Don't just go to events where you're going to meet all the same type of people as you. If you're a more operational type of person like myself, go to a CEO type event where you're going to meet other people that are business development hungry.
And all these CEOs are like, Ryan, you're a unicorn. Let's I want to hire you.
Exactly. But again, like, you don't want to build a community of people that are the same as you. You want to build a community that, helps, create something special, because you all have strengths and weaknesses that complement one another. And I think that is something that is very challenging, right? When we're gravitated towards things that are alike about one another, like, put yourself out there and feel uncomfortable. Every business partner I've ever had, from Scott back into my Brazen Careers days, I've worked with people that have really like pushed my boundaries in life. And I've very strategically picked those people, because I knew if I picked people just like myself, I wasn't going to get there. And when I'm looking at bringing people into our company, the community company, which is a community of people unto itself, I'm looking for people too that have strengths that we don't currently have in the business. And I want to make this the most complete organization as humanly possible. So take that into your own life when you're establishing that community of you, and make sure that you don't forget that you're not just looking for people with the same personality traits or the same interest. You're looking for people that might be drastically different, that can come together and do remarkable things.
Yeah, we talk about two things in the book, which I'm a firm believer in. The idea of anchors, and the idea of sort of taking other people's real estate and curating above it. And so anchors, whether it is people you've identified in your sphere that you have direct access to as connectors, that can help you to work your way more naturally into certain areas that they already have a connection to. And obviously the goal is you've already had a long time relationship with that individual. That helps you to play off one another. I used to go to events all the time where I'm strong in some rooms and the person I'm with is strong in others, just to sort of, change worlds and have conversations I wouldn't normally have. But more importantly, try to get yourself into the sort of sphere of influence of a conversation rather than being on the outside circle as you're beginning to build a community. It gives you a better vantage point of what are people saying, thinking, what do you think of them? And by sort of having that association with certain individuals, again, and this doesn't mean, by the way, you have to be friends with, like, in, let's say, the tech terms, the one VC who's got the billions of dollars and he or she is your individual anchor. This could be literally you are, in your local community meeting the, president of the Chamber of Commerce in your local area, and you've built a strong relationship with that one person because that one person gives you indirect and direct access to hundreds of others that, when you're associated with that person, you can meet. When we talk about the sort of curating other people's real estate, One of the things we learned early on is by creating collision for other people that they would not have otherwise met the people they met. You become that center sphere. And so we would early on in the YEC days basically look at where were the people we wanted to meet. So whether it was in GrowCo, whether it was a Forbes conference under 30 or Dreamforce or whatever it was, we would basically identify 10, 20, 30 people that we would hand select from that much larger crowd because they were already going to be there. And then we would find entrepreneurs in the local area of that. So not the ones that just flew in for, say, Dreamforce, but the ones that lived around that scene as well. And basically just say, hey, we're going to get this group together, quiet, off the beaten path, give you a bit of a, as Ryan calls it, like this oasis effect. So it's not just constant business card, tech booths, whatever. And not only have you been able to sort of bring together whatever ends up being 10, 20 people, but you've amplified the connection opportunities for all of those people in a like-minded group. You've been put yourself at the center of the sphere, but you've used the idea of curating a much larger thing into a much smaller one to put yourself in the center. And more times than not, the people that we were doing this for, this is even before we had, name recognition with YEC, very early on, we learned that people so yearned for genuine connection at these kinds of monster events that even if they didn't know who you were, as long as you weren't like some psychopath that if they look on Google, you're going to find like 10 levels of scam artist, right? Sure. If you're just somebody who is authentic and saying, hey, we're just it's a non-committal hour-long thing. There's no pitches, presentation, just we're getting together entrepreneurs or whatever your specific area is and these key areas, this is the kind of criteria of the room, love for you to stop by. I mean, that built our entire events model ongoing. And that's what we've done for years now. We tie into a major thing to extract people from that thing for just a little bit and then bring locals in as well. It is incredibly effective. And then obviously, we've literally had people that have gone to, again, one of these events and said, the best part of the events was attending your thing, which wasn't even your event. And I don't believe that's a tactic that you need some massive credibility to do, nor do I think these are meant to be 50, 100-person things. You could have the most meaningful series of interactions by curating 10 people in a room, 5 people in a room. But I think it's the curation and creating collision they wouldn't have otherwise had to create that value proposition that gets people saying, you know what, I'm going to give this a shot. Then it's on you to make sure that it's really impactful.
Those are two exact principles with different words I have for them. One was becoming a catalyst, which is identical. Is basically connecting like-minded individuals, whether that be through a dinner, through a mixer, through a retreat, or even just like an activity. And the other one was connect with connectors. That's the fastest way to and that's actually when it comes to looking at my network as a whole and those relationships I really want to invest in. It's much easier for me to deepen one relationship than it is 50. So who are those connectors in my community and what, I guess, communities do they represent or can they tap into? So if I need something like help with something in tech, David Hassel knows 70% of people in tech. So I invest a lot in that relationship because I know if I ever needed somebody in tech, he could open up those floodgates.
I think the last key point is in whatever your real estate that you want to create is, I think it's the one thing that makes you special though that also stands out. So for us, that's always been when we finally have a defined group, again, whatever kind of event or curated offsite oasis that we were talking about, we go the extra sort of level to help create those context conversations by asking people individually by themselves a series of questions that are going to help us to extract sort of pre-context and then share that with the other people in the group so that they already know, here's where your biggest strength is, not just like the LinkedIn profile, which we offer as well, so you know who the person is from a CV level, but basically saying, here's where I think I have the most value that I can offer. And here's a challenge I'm currently facing right now that I'm looking for advice or feedback on. So now everybody has sort of this digest before they've even walked into whether it's a 550 person room. And again, we've used technology to amplify the humanity. But I think that special sort of sauce has made people feel more productive. So they are going in not to say oh, hi, I'm John. Here's what I do. It's, oh, John. Oh, great. I read your CV. Oh, and yeah, it seems you're looking for this. I know a couple people I can help. Can you give me a little more information about the specifics? But by being that person, this is an everyman tactic, and I even hate to use the word tactic. It's just a way to bring it back to what it was meant to be. Bring that humanity back into a circle that makes sense.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for the work that you do in the context of YEC and building community there. And then also for, putting a book together. Like I was reading, when I read the book, I was like, this is a lot of work. Not only like books are a lot of work, but the amount of people that you have interviewed and included in the book. Because I'm like, then you have to you interview them, then you have to squeeze it into a chapter. Then you have to follow up and make sure what you wrote is accurate. It's just, it's logistically a nightmare. So I know the amount of effort that goes into a book like this, and definitely doesn't go unnoticed and is definitely needed in the marketplace. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you guys. So that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening. As a quick reminder, we'll be giving away 10 copies of Scott and Ryan's book, Superconnector, Stop Networking and Start Building Business Relationships That Matter. We'll be giving that away in the Community Made group, a book that we referenced several times in this episode. If you're not a member, joining the group is free. Simply visit communitymade.com to get access. Second, we decided to take some of the concepts shared in the season on how to grow, nurture, and amplify your business relationships and go deeper in an intimate live workshop setting. I love live experiences, so I'm super excited for the first one. Because that first one sold out so quickly and didn't give many people an opportunity to take advantage of it, we decided to announce a second date. So for dates and availability on that workshop, visit superconnectorworkshop.com. That's superconnectorworkshop.com. If you enjoyed this episode, show some love to Scott and Ryan by taking a screenshot of your podcast app and pinging them on Twitter at Scott Gerber and Ryan Paugh. Ryan's last name is Paugh. For more details on both of these fine gentlemen, visit scottgerber.com or yec.co. Ryan owns the domain name for his website, but doesn't have a personal brand. Maybe that's the introvert in him. But before I go, I got to give a shout out to Nate Lesnick for leaving the following review on iTunes. He said, I'm a huge fan of the Community Made podcast. Jason isn't afraid to share unconventional or even controversial opinions to make you question your assumptions. Check out episode 2. It's awesome. Jason's laid back and casual interviewing style feels like more of a genuine conversation with his guests, allowing him to go deeper and uncover more golden nuggets. Definitely check out his interview with Naveen Jain. So many knowledge bombs are dropped. I've gotten so much value out of Community Made and can't recommend it enough. Thank you, Jason. No, Nate, thank you for the rating and the review. I really appreciate it. For the rest of you out there, if you enjoyed this episode or you're a fan of what we're doing here at Community Made, I would be forever grateful if you would leave a review on iTunes or Facebook, or rate the podcast, or share it with your friends. That means the world to me. I will say, join me for the next episode, a very special Superconnector secrets, I guess you could say, Q&A episode where I tackle some of the top questions from our Community Made group, including how to navigate small talk if you hate it, how I spent over $30,000 to foster a single relationship, the correct way to connect and introduce people, and why you will never foster deep relationships if you can't ask for help. This was one that took me a long time to learn. I'll see you on the next episode. Enjoy the rest of your week.